We are WISE. It is an acronym for welcoming, inclusive, supportive, and engaged around issues of mental health. We are modeled after ONA, and CHHSM is ONA, and so we are not that far away from, even though it might be a little bit new for some of you to be hearing about us, we are not that far away from what you, I think, already know about. And my greatest hope in our talk today is that we will ignite an excitement within you. And while we're talking, if you will put on your thinking caps to imagine how you can bring what we're talking about into your organization, into your work. Because if you have the passion, we have the flexibility to bring WISE certification to your particular group. I like this series of graphics because it has the road and outdoors, and it conveys what we're all about. And it happens, just by coincidence, to fit beautifully with CHHSM's theme this year, Together Through Mountains and Valleys. Because WISE is a journey in a very big and unknown world. But there is light and hope and peace with every person and every organization that enters into this path with us. All it takes is an earnest resolve and a pure heart as represented by this child. So this is Becoming WISE, the journey. So this is what we'll cover in the next 40 minutes or so, along with a Q&A. And we have been doing this in faith communities for the most part. So you can insert the name of your organization into any time you see faith community. We are so grateful for your interest, and we are committed to making our structure towards certification, as I say, work for your organization. And so, yes, you can see what we'll cover. Okay. Our WISE movement is the most eloquent, boots-on-the-ground response I've ever seen to the tremendous mental health need that's out there. 1 in 4 individuals suffers from some kind of mental health crisis. So it's all around us, it's us, and we need to have something that is about talking openly, about doing, about meeting each other where we are, and WISE does this. I have been a practicing psychologist for 35 years. I just retired this past December from clinical practice. It was extremely meaningful work, being a partner with another person in their journey, in finding their way through their mental anguish to a place that works for them, to a place of peace where they can begin to thrive. It was my life's work, and I loved it. But change in therapy happens in a very small world. It's usually the therapist and the client. It's very private, as it should be. And it often takes place without the wider support of the larger community. And of course, many people with mental health challenges never go to therapy at all, but still are trapped in a loneliness that they perceive will never end, or a drug dependency they can't shake, or they're living with a chronic mental health diagnosis that, diagnosed or undiagnosed, they're living with it. So in your particular health and human service niche, you can probably tick through the mental health crises that arise from, say, lack of affordable housing, aging, lack of health care, children without their basic needs met, youth at risk. It's been great to be here since, when did we come in? I'm confused too. Tuesday. And be able to talk to people. CHHSM is new for us. It was so funny, the person in the evening that talked about Shazam. We weren't that bad, but we were having a hard time with the acronym.
Yes.
And but you are the most wonderful people. I entered into different groups, and I was welcome. You all had, your own people you knew, but you welcomed me, and I got to know some of you a little bit, and I was able to tell how well you will integrate with what we're all about. And a couple of organizations are already forming WISE task forces, and it comes out of the mental pain of their clients, their patrons, and of their staff. And so they said, this is what we need. And so that just warmed my heart so much. And so think about, as we're talking, how this applies for your group. In my own immediate family, we experienced a suicide in 2017. It was my daughter who had been abused at age 2 and came to us at age 4. We were a family for 18 years. There was always a brokenness that she struggled mightily to overcome. Her brave attempt to find her way in a world that couldn't fathom her reality, that will always stand as my greatest example of courage that I will ever see, ever witness. And I always wonder what difference could have been made by her being immersed in a community that discussed the realities of mental health challenges as easily as they discuss the budget, right? Or the Christmas play coming up, or whatever, the gathering. If she could have grown up seeing people every week unafraid to be in their own community, speaking about their own anxieties and demons, mental health struggles, and for her to be able to do so if she wished, and to be openly loved and included. At the very least, she would have been shoulder to shoulder with people who also sometimes wondered how to go on, and to be aware of all the ways that people do, and of the help and care that can surround the person in deep mental pain. I won't know that for Erica, but it has been life-saving for me to work with a dynamic mental health board and all the churches, synagogues. We have synagogues. We have, and all the synagogues are here in Colorado. Colorado has it happening. Campus ministries who are determined that they will speak out, reach out, actively minister, educate, and most of all, embrace anyone who may be in a similar situation. We know of lives saved because of this outreach. So it's a beautiful thing to be involved with, and we hope you, again, I keep saying this, I think I have it written down everywhere, take this information back and then contact us about how to get started. We have an amazing history. We think the best way to do this is for you to get to know us, and then we want to get to know you. So, as we go through this, it's just a way for you to become personally acquainted with us, and hopefully that will, speak to you as well. I thought this was very apropos. Out of tragedy, God spoke, and people listened. It has been said that all things human come from personal story. Our story of WISE began in 2007, following a double suicide here at a church in Colorado, in Boulder. It was one family a year apart. Reverend Alan Johnson was the pastor. If you've ever had a chance to know him or hear him speak, he's amazing, and he really got the ball rolling. He's my mentor for sure. But because of the devastation and agony that came about, people came together and started to ask, how can they do something? They began to learn about mental illness and to expand their awareness. In 2009, at a Pathways to Promise conference, a group of about 15 to 17 UCC participants just got together in a room trying to come up with a practical and personal approach to mental health needs. And out of this meeting was born the Mental Illness Network, which later became the Mental Health Network. In 2010, the church became A2A and joined forces with the UCC to become accessible to all. So at that point, it was time to form a covenant. So Reverend Alan Johnson sat down with others and said, okay, how can we be more welcoming? We already have the inclusive part, being A2A. And so they had a marketing person, yay marketing, on their team that came up with whys. They added supportive and engaged, and it just seemed perfectly right. So this acronym has been our simple but beautiful guide for this ministry ever since. So, yeah, as I say, I like these. This slide. It was already populated, all these slides, and I put my own in. But this was here from the beginning. I didn't know Walt Disney said this. The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. And boy, that's exactly what we're about, because we are boots on the ground. You cannot get certified if you don't have something you are doing, a lot you are doing. And it's early founders say there's just way too much kind of private talking and, hand-wringing in mental health and not doing anything. So we try to change that. So this slide, it's hard to keep this slide current because we have, I think we may have 52 faith communities now. And churches outside our denomination and even our Christian faith are choosing to become wise. We have 3 UCC conferences, 2 associations, college campuses are on the cusp, and we hope to add social human services, nonprofits, to our ranks very soon. How did we get here? How did they get here? The ones that are certified. So it all starts with going to our website. With your candles, you have a QR code on your card that's stapled. And when you get there, it tells you there's a tab saying beginning wise. Is that right?
It leads you straight to the beginning wise.
With beginning wise.
Yeah.
And then how to begin the WISE process, push that tab. And it asks you to fill out a survey for us. And that is just about your intention to enter this journey and then submit it to us. And you will see it's currently designed for churches. We're just going to have to start realigning a little bit more to take other entities. But use your judgment to fill in what is equivalent to pastors, such as your manager, your team leader. We are very flexible, and all we need is your contact information about your thinking and readiness to take this on, and we will assist you from there. I will say that we are regularly contacted by churches who never checked in with us but think that they have accomplished our steps. And think, okay, now we're wise. And it can cause a lot of heartache and hard feelings if they're not able to be certified. So do please let us know early in the process. I mean, we like I say, we just want to know that you're doing something. We let you decide, but we can't just have people who sort of read things and say, okay, we have a team and here we go. So, but you do form a committee, and these should be individuals that obviously are interested in working with mental health. And as much as possible, try to get a representative from all areas of your organization. So by nature, it probably has to be centered within your executive area, because that is going to be the area that stays in your organization, where staff and clients change. But you can certainly bring in people that can be there for 6 months or a year or something. so that you have as much representation throughout your organization as a speaker, who can speak to what's going on where they are in your group. And then, I like to say that you begin to live with a little bit of ambiguity. You must discern what will work with your organization and begin to formulate a path. And this can come from your committee discussing their own mental health issues. I mean, that's the best. You sort of become this little safe network, say 8 people that say, well, no one ever invited me in my workplace or anywhere to talk about this, but this is what's going on. And, you begin to sort of, in a microcosm, do what you hope your whole organization does. And or people come because, might be part of your initial committee because of family that have mental health issues. We have tools to assist, but we do stay away from a 1, 2, 3 approach to allow you airspace to develop what is relevant for you. But one resource that people do find very helpful at the beginning of your journey, again on the website, and I have copies, some of you may have picked this up, and are there more over there?
Yeah, there's a
Okay.
handful more too.
Under congregational toolkits on our website, we have an assessment of mental health needs. This is from my church. I developed this. This is, so it'll say DBUCC. And this is only a template. Change it as you see fit. But it asks people about fear, suicidal thoughts, loneliness. Compassion fatigue, right, is big in these organizations. Loss of your pet. People don't talk about that. That's real grief. And so put these things on a survey, give it out anonymously, because people want to be safe to be able to say what they need to. There's a letter that introduces it, so you can just hand out the survey and the letter. People can understand what they're supposed to do. Hand it back in. And then you will get a cluster of things that tend to be what most people, not most, but you will see a cluster of things that people are dealing with. And that would be a really good place to start addressing, the needs of your organization, rather than just, start out of, no clue. And then you can bring in professionals, you can all get trained, or a number of people can get trained in mental health first aid, which is a wonderful way to understand how to deal with people in crisis. You can form a book study, which is really nice because if people aren't ready to talk about themselves, they can talk about the character, and there's a distance there, and it's just a safe way to get started. A great book is Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. Has anybody read that? It's humorous. Yay!
It's fabulous.
Isn't it great?
I loved it.
You just root for this person, and so but it shows how people react to her. Everyone can relate to it. So doing something like that's a really kind of non-threatening way to get started. Become a support, resource, and education magnet for mental health, however you decide to do that. But you will be assigned a liaison from us because you submitted that survey, and we can also help you as you let us get to know you. Okay, and then this can take some time. We don't have churches going through this in usually 6 months or so. It can happen. But it can take a while because we want you to develop an identity of how to serve in this capacity. We want you to feel it. We want everyone to be comfortable with talking. Everything you do, call it a mental health day or a mental health book study or something. And this takes time to develop sort of a culture. And once you feel that you have that, you may be ready to write your covenant. And I like to say that at this point, it's already in you. But you will have inhabited this program by now. You'll be feeling it in your bones, and so your covenant will just more or less write itself. You are creating something that will outlive your generation in your organization. It's meant to be for the ages. And this covenant will be your statement to people who come after you about what you've done and what you expect them to continue in your stead. And we have samples, so you can look at, and I'll share one with you. But yours should be unique to you. There's no template. There are a few standard things you want to include. You want to include your organization's understanding of suffering and mental health struggles and exclusion that people feel. It's still a thing, right? It's still a stigma. Talk about the mandate you experience to act according to the dictates of your values or your faith. And what will you do? When you submit your covenant to your liaison, we will be looking at whether you are caring for those in your organization as well as your wider community. Whether you're welcoming those with mental health diagnoses into all aspects of your group life, including leadership. We ask you we ask that you continue a robust ministry after you receive your certification, and you check in with us to let us know what you've been doing. And regarding a harmful practice currently happening to many LGBTQIA youth, conversion therapy, where somehow they think they can make them not gay. It's harmful, it's horrible, and we voted last year that anyone who is a proponent of conversion therapy cannot receive our certification. And kind of that's it. You then schedule a vote with your board. You let us know about your covenants, send that to us. We certify you as wise, and we celebrate that with bells on. Some special things happen when you do that. We're incredibly grateful for any organization that undertakes this program and works to incorporate it, because that's what we're living for, and you're our only way to do this. Okay, so that, let me just talk a little bit about how we doing on time.
We're at 4:10 out of 4:45, I believe.
That's right.
So we got about 30 minutes.
Okay. I won't go through all this, but I just, when my first church that I was liaison for, I have a special place in my heart. It was Kent United Church of Christ in Ohio. And I thought they wrote a beautiful covenant, so I thought I'd just share a few thoughts from there. They say that entering in to a wise covenant is a holy and sacred promise to God, to each other, and to our community. It is grounded in the perfect love we know God holds for us. We are God's beloved children, and through a wise covenant, we proclaim we are beloved even when we are experiencing mental illness, addiction, or other brain disease. We recognize mental health as a part of all our lives. This is not us versus them. We recognize it, so they're voting on this, so it's I recognize, each of them has to specify this. I recognize the role of our congregation is not to fix situations, but to make referrals and to share resources when appropriate, and to be present with those experiencing challenges, responding with compassion. I am called to proclaim that we are loved by our almighty and all vulnerable God, exactly for who we are, no exceptions. Our identity is not rooted in diagnosis, addiction, or mental health challenge, but as a beloved child of God. And just one more. They hold a sacred and safe space to accompany one another and our families through experiences of the pain and despair of mental illness, addiction, and other disease, and create a stigma-free, judgment-free, and shame-free environment. We choose words that are life-giving and not stigmatizing labels. So much of it's about being present, right? And that's what this is all about. let's see what questions you have, and we also have some thoughts from Abby too about how this can be more practical for your organization. But let's lead with any thoughts or questions.
Chris Cox from Boylton. I was wondering if you all could speak after the congregations that went through this process, how has that really transformed the way in which they've engaged their community? I'm looking for the action part of it.
Yeah. Oh, there's just so many ways. You know, youth is a big part. I didn't address that so much because I didn't know how much that applies here, but to have the youth involved, they have brought youth in that have had nothing to do with church because they've created safe spaces. Every church is so unique, so, you know, reaching out to the community, it depends on who's around you. So, you know, there's one church that put a pop-up mental health stand outside an Indian reservation, and just, you know, man that for people struggling with you know, alcoholism and all kinds of things. And so the direct ways that people can serve, I mean, churches serve anyway, your organizations serve anyway, but those are somewhat formulaic at some point, right? You know, you have your churches have their Bible studies, they have church socials, they go visit the sick or whatever. This is a little bit more cutting edge. You have to do something that's unique to your community and kind of revisit it. And it's really revitalized a lot of churches in ways that they didn't anticipate. It makes them more activist.
The Indiana-Kentucky Conference is a WISE conference, and
Yes.
one of the things we committed to doing is a 10-hour-a-week person on staff who works with the clergy and the whole conference around mental health. And just being committed to having that person on staff for 10 hours a week has made a huge difference in the conference. It's not a big financial investment, but it's been a huge investment for the conference too.
I'm sorry, so after they've made their covenant, they've been kind of living into it for a bit. As you know, mental health needs change and the community changes. Do they revise this, or how often do they go back to that WISE survey of evaluating what's going on now and who's in our doors and beyond our doors now that we're kind of letting that covenant evolve and grow?
Yeah. That's what we do in our church. We periodically redo a survey.
Yeah.
Just to, you know, you can be sitting next to somebody for decades and not know what's going on with them in a deep way, right?
Yeah.
And so you can't just assume you know. You have to keep assessing, I think.
Yeah.
And the covenant is broad enough. That doesn't have to be changed, right? That's just about your,
Okay.
that should not have to be revised.
Gotcha.
But what you do, yes, should evolve with who your people are and what the needs are. It needs to be nimble, right? And it, you know, the vulnerability is what takes courage. People, I think that we don't want to skirt on the outsides, just only talking about, say, anxiety and whatever. People don't want to talk about suicide. They don't want, you know, so I think that's something to have, you know, to have sort of a kind of a mandate that, hey, you know, how deep are the issues going? We seem to, it looks like we're coasting along. Are we dealing with what's really going on? Because that's where this started. People are dying in our midst. And so we always want to be not falling asleep at the wheel. That's the thing. Does that answer, I don't know, what did you have in mind when you were asking that?
So, first I need to applaud that this is important work. We got to break down the stigmatism. So I've, as a licensed clinical social worker for 3 decades that runs an organizations on the front line, doing mobile crisis, therapists in schools, on 40 different programs. The needs today is significantly different than it was 4 years ago. And I'm really looking at, we've been an advocate to open up from our funders and our legislators, allowing people with life experiences to be able to come into the work. And as a result of that, as an administrator, I found myself woefully wanting and not recognizing I had a commitment to these folks who's on the front line, and I haven't put enough services to be able to support them. As an example, in one county in Illinois, we provided in February 102 crisis calls. If you do the math, on an average call is 3.5 hours. There's staff around the clock that's out in the community helping children. And I'm really searching, how can I help my staff along the way? I don't know enough about your framework. Illinois South, the conference I work in, is also WISE approved. So I'm really trying to get a sense, better understanding it, and is there opportunities for this framework to come into my structure and to be able to help my staff? So I'm longing to be able to help them, and they're struggling horribly. It's painful to watch, painful.
Yeah, there's one of the things we're working on is, again, statistically, just we've worked mostly with congregations, synagogues, but we're getting more associations, conferences, and we want to get more nonprofits in general. So it's definitely, one of the great things is that this whole thing is super flexible. It's super tailored to your needs of your boards, your staff, your community. And so,
Like, how would you say can you tell us how they're struggling?
I'm sorry.
How are they struggling, your staff?
Well, I think that the secondary trauma that they carry, as well as their life experiences, most of them are in recovery in some way. It triggers them. And just the intensity of the work. Obviously, from your career, you understand, my folks are in people's homes, or they're in the hospitals, and they're in emergency room, and there's no places for them. And we're trying to make the best clinical decisions for them and the family. It's just heavy. It's heavy. And again, I will identify this landscape has changed through the pandemic. And what we're dealing with today is unprecedented in so many ways.
That's true.
And we're just searching, and again, I'm so excited for our conference getting a board, and I felt that I needed I have a responsibility to better understand the model. And can this framework be used, in a $34 million organization?
So can you research then? So one of the first things you would do in your process is to look into what are the resources out there for compassion fatigue, for the bringing in, there is quite a few. I mean, I'd have to look at it myself, but you could bring in resources and professionals to deal with, the people that are living with that secondary,
So I have
support group.
probably 40 licensed therapists of different degrees in our organization. I've also contracted with an outside firm, private practitioners, to bring them in because the staff identified they'd be more comfortable talking to someone. We're
Right.
actually paying them during
Yes.
work time to have clinical sessions.
Therapists are the worst at taking care of themselves, right? So they have to be made to, yes.
I was just going to share, United Church Homes is starting this process. We had, in the course of about 4 months last summer, 3 residents who died by suicide, and one had shot his wife in the memory care neighborhood before shooting himself. The trauma, this is a staffing issue in an area where we can't get staff to begin with. In that particular community, we brought in professionals immediately, but the administrator of that building and the DON left within weeks. And I talked to the ED, and they still have not filled that administrative position. So from a staffing standpoint, how we care for the staff is huge. And in one of the situations, the chaplain, it's a housing community, it doesn't have a chaplain, but one of our chaplains in our system went and met with the residents the next day, and they were blown away by these older adults. Everyone in that room had a story to share about how suicide had touched their lives, and they had never talked about it before. So Reverend Daniel put together a group of us who said, okay, what do we need to be doing to help know what the warning signs are before these events happen? And he was thinking we'd be done in December. We got to December, and that committee said, okay, we're starting this process. We are not finished by any means. And so as a part of that mental health task force, there's an individual who's putting together a team specifically that will be working with the WISE. They've been in conversations with Monica, and we had conversations with Sarah Lund. And so we need this both for our residents and of staff, and so out of that, September is Suicide Awareness Month, I believe. And so we immediately, within weeks, put together materials, sent it to all 80 of our communities and the leadership and the staff. And I was surprised how many people, staff members, reached out and just said thank you. They didn't have to share the rest of their story. They just said thank you.
Just to have you notice and pay attention by doing something like that, that's, to be cared for at that level, they're not expecting it, right?
And that's the thing about WISE, or what we're promoting, is a cultural change. So there are no easy answers or, fixes that will work for every person. And that's why it takes so long, because you have to examine what's going on around you and what might work. And it's hard. I mean, we need to do it, inclusively together with one another, because there are no easy answers, and it's difficult. But there are a lot of ideas, and a lot of people trying creative things that are working. And I think therapy dogs and just emotional support.
Bring dogs.
Right. I chaplain for a police department that now has it's not any sort of effective canine in any way. He's just a cuddly puppy that they have at the station now, just to help with morale, and it's working. It seems to be effective, but it's just somebody's small idea that is making a little bit of a difference.
Can I have a follow-up to you, Chris? I was wondering, with all of given what you're in your own wheelhouse, right, along all this, trying to care for your staff, I just wonder about if something that this process can offer you is that deep faith-based perspective, the spirituality, the belonging to something greater and bigger, transcendent than ourselves, if that part has been part of the healing experience for your folks, shared about having another kind of space that maybe your therapists are trained in and maybe not, but also that something like this process could really make that alive for people. Because it is a deeply spiritual angst, like the suffering, this particular kind of suffering and existential crisis of meaning and what is happening in our world and inside us. To me, that is something that is so tangible, so that we have to offer that's so unique and deeply aligned with the mission, right? That is maybe alive in another way. So I don't know how that has been incorporated already, but just sort of wondering about that. Yeah.
I wanted to share too, and this may be a crowd that knows this already, but I was profoundly affected by thinking differently, not only as a leader of a ministry of the UCC called Deaconess, but also thinking about leading spiritual awakening and restoration as well from the church orientation. And when I researched that generation Gen Z, by virtue, how if you're a baby boomer, these are your description, and then if you're a millennial, you're this one. Gen Z is the first one that in their description of who they are is mental health issues. That is very profound, where everyone else is very different, just the isolation, the inability to know how to communicate, the things we may take for granted in socialization, because cheerleading and other things might be, but how they don't even have the baseline that we had for so many different reasons, exacerbated by pandemic, yes, but also by technology and other things, to have a generation identified as, and by virtue of being born from this year to this year, you have mental health baseline issues, that to me draws attention to what we're up against generationally, and why, to your point, I think the extraction. We go so far in trying to be neutral and accommodating that we extract the very gift of what Christ has given us. And by no means am I saying that we should be jerks about Christianity, because they're out there. But I also think that sometimes we can over pivot to neutrality. And so offering the gift of what we actually have to give, we're not doing. So there's a balance, in my opinion, of exactly what you said, Elise. We feel like we have beautiful something to offer, and yet when we get into certain contexts, we back up on that witness. And I too think that that is the sin of omission, just as much as the sin of commission is something that's important.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up the, youth, and I don't know if I'm millennial or Gen Z. Different polls say different things. I identify as millennial, I grew up with the VHSs and like, yeah, so I'm in that middle ground and I've done a lot of work with youth and it's just there is a lot more openness and there is a lot more honesty there, and you know, just the casual, oh, I'm feeling depressed today,
Right.
instead of just keeping that in. And sometimes I've had youth from youth group just catch me off guard with this sharing. I'm like, oh, well, thank you for, you know, bringing that up. So yes, definitely, these young people are, one, they're the next generation. Soon this will be, you know, the Gen Z will take over the world, right? But they're important.
Yeah,
They surpass baby boomers. They just like to give you some sense of that, right? And they'll take over the world if they live long enough to do it. Like, that's how urgent it is.
Right, exactly.
Yes.
I'm sorry, you were.
Yeah, oh, I was just gonna say, so I was just listening to Beth. I manage a retirement community. The certification, is that for the community, or do you set up a group of people? Is it a whole different program that you put together in your community to support, whether it's the staff or the residents, or what? How did you do that? How are you working that, the structure?
We're in the
into
very
your-
beginning processes. We don't have a liaison. I mean, that's how
Yeah, we
beginning it is.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah,
but this is the committee that will do the work, that will take a look at the surveys and take a look at what are the things we can do. And then they will bring that to the mental health task force, and we will take that to the executive staff and including the board. You know, we won't write a resolution. We don't, right, as an organization, don't write resolutions. But
so it's starting with the task force?
we're starting with the
task force or committee.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it usually is, you know, it comes from the top down, but you decide how you implement it all the way down your organization. But the certification, I think, is a value because it gives everybody that's looking at you something to say, okay, this is what, you know, it doesn't make you wise, or it make you mental health literate, but it says who you already are, and it's a way of, you know, emphasizing to others, this is what they're trying to live out, you know, so
So
it's
the
for others to
certification
look at.
does go to the organization, something
Yes.
that we could promote.
Right,
that
to
we
promote,
support,
exactly,
that we embrace and work
exactly.
with.
Yeah, so kind of what my niche in this was kind of that discussion of, you know, working with organizations that aren't, you know, we've got this congregation and then congregation, community, cool, done. There's so many more layers in a lot of organizations, I mean, I guess in churches as well. But, you know, that trickle-down effect, I know some of you guys were in the other presentation that was in here this morning, the restorative justice in the workplace. And there was a little bit of talk about that, kind of that trickle-down, you know, you get leadership on board, you get managers on board, and then supervisors, and then the rest of the staff. Because, you know, people on the bottom can say all they want, but if they're not being heard, or if there's, you know, here's our mission, here's our values, but then they're not following it. So in a way, the WISE process also creates this sort of, I mean, the UCC uses the word covenant a lot, but this covenant and this collaboration between all parts, so that it can trickle down not just to board members and not just to staff, but to patrons, clients, whatever you want to call that demographic of yours.
And everyone can look at that and say, this is what you do, and then you're accountable a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, just on the surface level, like, again, we'll give you the logo that says, hey, we're a WISE organization, and you get listed on our website. And one of the exciting things we're currently in the mix of is building up a collaborative online space for all of the organizations that have already become WISE, and kind of integrating that so that there's, you know, the journey doesn't stop. And I think that's one of the most important things, is that it keeps going, and that's why we kind of emphasize, you know, especially having that kind of core group that can keep things going up there. But
Isn't a piece of the certification is also your continuing education. How are you going to continue in some way reaching out to your community about mental health and that education piece? And that's really important. We don't leave that piece out.
Yeah, it's really awesome getting to hear, you've shared what's happening in your conference with your 10-hour a week person, and one of the goals of that online space is so that we can share those, what's working, what's not, just, again, that collaborative space that, you can keep it alive, and we can, if you're like, I don't know what we're gonna do for mental health month or whatever, but there's always ideas flowing, and we also are trying to work to share the joys that are happening in these WISE organizations, like on our social media, and we're trying to reach out and
How
make
you
sure
learn from each other.
Yeah, it's a very collaborative, very open, which I think there's lots of room to grow, and where we started with just congregations, and we've since gone out of Christianity. We've extended from the UCC, associations, conferences of the UCC, and we want to keep that growing and keep it going with nonprofits and other organizations where there are more of these multi-tier structures, especially when you're looking at the workplace, which was kind of talked about again in the morning session, but just the amount of, if you're working with paid staff or a board, if they're working full-time, they're spending like a quarter to a third of their lives at work. And when you can take care of your staff, they can better take care of themselves and can better take care of who they serve. And so again, trickling down. Yes. I also appreciated someone brought up the faith-based response, and I don't think it was mentioned in here, but I pulling straight from the Mental Health Network website when I quote this as far as a faith-based response in general. Jesus reached out to people who were marginalized, to those who were ostracized, and to those who were the outcasts in the computer screensaver, who are outcasts in society. Jesus' compassion and embrace exemplified what Jesus' followers ought to do: reach out to the least, the lost, and the lonely. The way of Jesus was not comfort, not ridicule, or was comfort, not ridicule. It was love, not indifference. It was empathy, not hostility. The way of Jesus is our spiritual calling. So I just really wanted to affirm that spiritual grounding, and I think from what I understand, most if not all of the organizations that are here with CHSM and have worked with CHSM over the years do have that kind of faith-based value system. And just, I hope you can take some time to reflect on, even in, again, a lot of workplaces are just very secular too, but how can you kind of ground that justice work in your own faith and reach that out farther.
Yes, I work in public policy advocacy, and I just wanted to lift up the fact that when we're talking to decision makers about, whether it's mental health legislation, access, expanding access, whatever it may be, it's good to be mindful that many of them or their families have experienced these things, and I've seen it a lot of times with members of Congress who you could really have incredibly powerful allies, and so opening up that conversation not only for our communities and for our organizations, but for people who are making the laws,
Yes.
that we're trying to work with, is just something to kind of remember, is that they are humans. We get frustrated, but but oftentimes I always tell people the best advocate tool you have is your story. And so when telling your story, you'll be surprised at how many people will respond to that.
Yeah, there's a lot of, I'm in Iowa, and there's been a lot of laws lately that have been proposed that are just not great for people's mental health, and so, you guys have the power to provide that hope and help rally and work for this very important thing, because, we've said it 50 times, but 1 in 4 people live with some sort of mental illness, and if you think about, how many people you serve or interact with in a day, like 75% of people, if you're serving them, is that enough? Could you be helping that extra person? Again, Jesus left the 99 for the 1, so, yes.
I also know there's a really, because I'm learning UCC, I'm really coming in humble to figure out what I've said yes to. And what I appreciate, what I appreciate about UCC is its explicit nature around LGBTQIA. It is really amorphous still, in my opinion, although trying hard in the way with, when I see that sentence, harmful practices around LGBTQIA, y'all do that, we're not shaking hands with you. Harmful practices around racism, like that, for what UCC proposes to become, it's pretty silent still on anything other than straight up rainbow flagging it everywhere, which I'm not diminishing. I think it's important. It needs to happen, and it's weird. But for as many people that we're serving, look at the data, of the inequity in health and the equity in everything else.
Right.
And this statement isn't said about if you practice stuff that's oppressive to Black folks or, people of local mature, however you want to say it, it's profound to me how stake in the ground we are about LGBTQIA, and we should be, and given the legislation and the policy, absolutely. And where's the other part of the commitment?
We're big enough, we don't have to. I wondered
Right.
that, why, yeah.
Yeah, so I flag that, because it doesn't have to be either or,
No.
and we're inextricably linked in
And
our
it
oppression and our
strengthens.
liberation.
It strengthens.
But it's really glaring, in my opinion, that that's not present.
Yeah, so I've been writing notes as you guys have been coming up with questions and saying things, and that definitely something I started there, because, that's
It's
important.
kind of stark.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
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 That'll definitely be brought to the board attention, so.
I've heard both the term mental health and brain disease. Are those interchangeable? Is there, should we be using one or the other? And again, with the population that I work with, most people would not say that dementia is a mental health, but it's definitely a brain disease. So I think the terminology that we use is really important into what all is included under this umbrella and what we're allowed to talk about.
Good call.
I will say, the board is, at Synod, will be introducing a video series on intersectionality, and it deals with racism. So there's that starting. And it's about time, but it's so exciting because we've been so silent. Dementia is right, but it causes so many mental illness issues for caregivers, right?
And it itself is
itself.
a brain disease for the person who's living with that diagnosis.
It is a brain disease, yeah.
You're right.
I was thinking the same thing, especially for thinking of a lot of our providers and those spaces around, or Parkinson's, like my dad was Vietnam vet, Agent Orange exposure, PTSD, now has Parkinson's from all of that, and the struggle to even talk about or identify being so, but seeing everything around that and just not having, and the Medicaid, all of it impacts his way of being and navigating the world, and so I had the same wondering, and I'm glad there's a lot going on with youth too, but I also just wondered too about let's cross the spectrum of our human experience as well with things that are
short movie on Netflix that touches on a family whose mother gets early onset dementia, and she's in her late 40s when she finds out, and it does cause her mental health. The family is upset that she makes the diagnosis, but it shows how it affects her mental health, where she's still able to think about things for herself. But then, she, later on, as it's starting to progress, she makes a video, and she says when she's unable, she went to her doctor, prescribed a very heavy sedative, and then she says when she's not able to say who she is, she gives explicit directions to herself to go upstairs and take those pills and go lie down, because she knows what's coming. So to say that, you get that diagnosis and you just learn to go with the flow of it is not, you know what's coming, and now you're mentally anguished.
There's a pastor in Ohio who was diagnosed with dementia, and he's probably late 60s. And somebody had said to his wife, earlier is better. And she was able to get him to go to the doctor early in the process of recognizing the symptoms. And he now does a lot of speaking in congregations, and every time he speaks, multiple people come up to him and want to find out more about his journey, because they themselves can identify with what he's experiencing, or a loved one can identify with what he's experiencing. And the other side of that is, one of our chaplains had a resident move into long-term care, was not in the memory neighborhood of long-term care. And this resident did not want to speak with the chaplain, and that's fine. But she worked on building up a relationship, just, checking in with her and taking her, other resources. And she finally had a conversation with the daughter, and that even though she wasn't in the memory care neighborhood, she did have a diagnosis of dementia. And she did not want the chaplain coming into her room, because the church that she had belonged to in this small town for 40 years, the pastor had gone to the daughter and said, please do not ever bring your mother back to church. Her behavior is too disruptive. So we need to be talking about this in congregations. And so, yeah, she was angry with church.
So the answer to your question that you posed is, I actually want to walk away knowing that answer. How do you?
Well, see, I was
Is it
just
mental
gonna say,
illness? Is it brain
no, I think they're distinct, and I appreciate your naming that, because I think it's important to talk about. On our website, we kind of do a lot of listing, like mental health, traumatic brain injury, neurodiversity, because there are a lot of different components. But I think as we're trying to speak, quickly and conversationally, we tend to forget all those commas. And I don't think that we do have a good umbrella term yet. And I think we need to get better and figure out a way to speak more inclusively around that. So I appreciate your naming that. I guess we don't have a good answer other than they are distinct, and they are included in what we're trying to serve.
And they're all taboo.
Yeah, exactly, right. Yeah.
I feel like neurodiversity is somewhat enough of an umbrella term, but also,
Or like ADHD, or, which then can cause a lot of mental health issues as well.
it does, yeah.
Well, the WISE Network has also been working a lot with the disabilities industry, and they're aligned as though for both, the minister for both those things, and so having those things in conversation as well. Yeah, I think I'm really excited that we're getting, CHHSM and our member organization are getting more involved, because I think we have a lot to offer in return around this. Like, that's wheelhouse, why we're all, several of us there were like, we were had the same question, around, because those are the people that we're serving, and also just the spaces we're in, and questions around, that is different than a church where your church board are your members versus like a nonprofit where it's like, well, how is this for staff? Is it including here? Who's part of that? Who's at the table? How is that conversation starting? It's a little bit more complex and different, and I think that's really beautiful that we can kind of, as y'all are growing, we're growing with you, and I think, yeah. So thank you for, I'm really glad you're here.
Yeah, it's definitely, again, one of our growing pieces too. But it's so important, and I mean, I like how you brought the disabilities ministries. You know, right now we're in the community care space. We're working on that right now, and so there's so much collaboration possible and so much learning from all sides.
One of the challenges that you may be very already able to help us with, but we also are getting some good reactions from people, are reluctant to bring people with diagnosed mental illness into leadership or even into, you know, intimate settings like retreats or, you know, whatever, where you yourself are trying to get away and have a break. And, you know, so how do you fully embrace someone who is very needy? How do you, you know, how can we, it's nice to talk about it, how does it happen practically? And if we're doing this right, we embrace them, right? And with a disruptive person, you know, how do you keep those boundaries and still love them? And I think that's where we all can be leaders, because I think society in general does not do that. Yes?
Yeah, and there's actually a really nice program also, I think initiated by a UCC person called Companionship. It's sort of owned by Pathways to Promise, which is kind of the national resource for faith-based mental health support. But it teaches, it's this little 3-hour training, teaches people just how to come alongside someone else, not try to fix things, keep good boundaries, be it, you know, in a neighboring posture. And it's just a really beautiful way of acknowledging we're all in this together. It's not othering. It's not like you're the person with the problem and I'm here to help you. It's let's come alongside each other and journey together. So it's helpful in those kinds of settings, you know, but in just daily life as well.
Well, and what's so, I think, beautiful for you then, too, is to see how that person begins to blossom and become more fully themselves, and, you know, the things that might have kept them apart from others tend to start to soften.
Yeah. And hopefully it also changes us, too.
Changes
You know, that we
yes.
also find those kinds of, that kind of meaning and purpose and sense of community that everyone can.
Vicki, I'm interested, just to add a little bit to the pot. When you are everybody in some way is a caregiver of something. Like, I just went through the journey of Parkinson's on this whole different, let me tell you, right, with a loved one. And when you're asking questions, which is a valid one about like, so how for those that are have more intense needs, my question becomes to answer this in order to help contribute to what you're asking. For those like me that's in recovering intensive caregiving mode, you need a group of people who have more capacity than I do right now to be able to have it to give for those that need more. So the question becomes for me, is there an organized way where we could find out where the like caregiving fatigue might be over here, but there's some capacity over here? Because it really is difficult to ask someone that's in the work all the time or someone who's doing it at home, which is pretty much everybody, right? So who's the group of people that aren't in that intensive cycle of day and night in some way? Because to accommodate the additional heft, it takes a group of people that have capacity in a way that, like, I admit right now, I would love to, and I don't have it to give. Just to be able to admit that is like healthy for me. So how do we create an environment that allows for some level of shift and change and, okay, this is your conference to deal with that. But then this one, I can build that up again, because I feel like pandemic, at least in my life and looking at family and other things that I care for, it's so bone on bone that just to find capacity to pray at night, like to cook a meal, is, you know what I mean? Like, I try not to do agitational, movements like the agitation way to get you into like doing things, But agitation now, I mean, we're finding it, like people are pulling out guns before they're having a conversation because there's just no capacity. So I am wondering, like you, how to help create more space within the collective, because individuals, we don't have it.
So do you, so we have a problem of the people that are most involved don't tend to ask, right, for help as much. We also have, I think, a lack of confidence in, we need to empower more people to know that they can make a difference and can come alongside and help. That's what I think. People want to do the right thing, they want to help, but they don't believe in themselves how much of a difference they can make. And so I think empowering and saying, man, you can make such a difference for that person if you would go over and spend some time. Are any of you familiar with the movement, the furries?
Yes.
Yeah. So we had a group of furries in our... The furries, it's a, I don't know how to describe it, but there's a convention and everything where they dress as animals.
My hometown.
Ah, is that where
That's where
it
it is. We're very welcoming to them there.
It's a fandom.
It's a what?
It's a fandom of an appreciation of animals and anamorphic behaviors. So yes, but you have to be very embracing to understand.
So we had a group that came to our church. They'd been literally kicked out of 3 other churches. And, they were laying on our lawn, and people were stepping over them to come into church. And so, for whatever...
Learn something new every day, right?
I'm trying to catch what you're saying. So the furries are people
Dressed in animal.
They dress in
Animal
animal
costumes.
costumes. Or sometimes they just appreciate them at home.
Sometimes it's a coping mechanism for trauma. Sometimes
putting
it's
on animal costumes.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they have animal names, and our particular ones, they had some mental health issues that they were struggling with, and a couple of them were homeless, all of that. And so we had people, we were determined to make them feel welcome, but it was a lot for our people to deal with, and so we had almost everybody, sort of taking turns sitting with them, being with them, and nobody had too much to do then. And it was beautiful. They integrated. They became leaders. They became, very deeply loved members of our church. But it took a lot of people doing it because it was too much. If you didn't want to go to church, if you were going to have to take care of somebody because you were going there to get taken care of yourselves. And I think empowering more people somehow. But I like how you say, is there an organized way?
It's power in community. It's power in community. I work in a mental health facility, and I have mental health challenges due to my chronic debilitating conditions and the trauma that comes from knowing what's happening and what's going to happen with my body. And my children have the same conditions as I do, and they are highly gifted, but they have ADHD and anxiety that's based because of their giftedness and how they can comprehend everything. And their anxiety and depression is challenging. And the more I have power of community, that I can say, I need someone to tap me out. I need someone who understands to sit there and be with my kids while I go do something else. And that's what we do at Crossroad, is we're a community. We can't take care of a client or a child on our own. We do it in community. And it's the same thing in a congregation, a faith-based organization.
Right.
It's community. It's sharing responsibility. It's the person who has the strength to support someone in this part of their walk. That's the person that does it, and someone else can learn and go along. But it's also a lot of education. It's a lot of education. How do I interact with someone? How do I make sure that the phrases that I use are not going to be harmful to someone? How do I make sure that my behaviors are not going to be harmful to someone? So it's not just something that we can walk in and say, okay, we're going to be wise today. We have to go through a lot of education. we have to go through the mental health first aid and various parts like that, so that we can say, I'm done today, I can't do it. You know, I'm going to go and take care of communion today while someone else takes care of the children, or someone else goes and sits with this furry over here, or whatever. Today, this is what I need to do for my well-being and still supporting our community and our congregation. It's the power of community and being open about it.
That's all this is.
So speaking of the power of community,